I think one of the most important things that a human being can understand about oneself is what it means to be a language user. This is, I believe, one of the things that separates humans as biological animals from the rest of the world. And it's sort of spooky if you think about it, but we are also animals, but we seem to be running something a little bit different. We seem to be interacting with nature and the world in a way in which other creatures of the earth don't seem to be. As far as we can tell, there is no other species on the planet that uses language and uses language in the way that we do. Fundamentally, and what's most important to understand is that when we are using language, we're not just talking, but we are thinking about the world in a way that doesn't naturally exist. The term that linguists use to describe this is digital infinity. Okay, and it's important that you understand what digital means. And I think an easy way to introduce this idea is just to sort of consider that when you use a word, you are using a sort of tag that identifies something in nature or something that maybe is man-made, but even man-made things are kind of part of nature, are they not? But that you are using words digitally as sort of an on and off switch for a certain idea. An idea, right, which exists in the universe. Maybe you're talking about something in nature, or maybe you're talking about something that again is man-made, building on these sorts of symbols. So for example, the word for tree, I mean, we all have a general idea of what a tree is, but if you really think about it, right, a tree is sort of a meaningless word if you are surrounded by trees, right? You might not even have a word for something so general. But what we're trying to do, and what I'm trying to get you to understand, is that this thing that we do, this trick that we do, which is we treat the sort of meaty, chaotic, natural world that's around us, right? And you have to imagine that language at one point did not exist on Earth, and this seems to be true. Scientists conjecture that language has only been on Earth somewhere from 50 to 100,000 years, right? And that it is being used by us. Digital infinity, as Chomsky calls it, this idea that we use discrete symbols to make an infinite number, an infinitely large possible number of combinations, each with an associated meaning, so that there is a sort of agreed upon reality or simulation of reality that you are agreeing to by using language. So what this means is that at some point language sort of came into existence. That they're among, whatever the primates, in the pre-human mind, at some point went from seeing the universe, nature as its whole, right? All perception being whole, to sort of naming different things that we see, different shapes, subdividing those into their sort of constituent parts, that seems to be the main difference between what humans have been able to do on Earth and what everybody else, every other creature with a brain, right? Or basically, it seems as though all things are conscious, but sort of humans are able to talk about consciousness. Humans are able to sort of not just think, because thinking and language are not the same thing. So, but that we are able to put these into terms, abstract terms. And so when you are using language, you are using things that you want to have a sort of digital precision, right? But again, precision itself is a made-up sort of human term, right? And the only things that really seem to be precise are like tools made by humans, or we have a human notion of precision, but that does not. You don't see that in nature. So this means that another example, a sort of way of turning your brain onto the idea that you are a language user, is to think about things like numbers. And so number use goes hand in hand with language, being a language user. So if you are using language, you are sort of, again, treating the world digitally, and that's what you do when you use numbers, right? When we count things, for example, you can only really count a thing if you agree on what anything is, right? And it's pretty easy to determine that, right? You cannot really clearly define anything in the universe in sort of in terms of physical properties, but that we just go around, naming things that we see around us, right? Whatever those things are, if they're industrial objects, your head will be full of names for various things. If they're things in nature, right? Again, these are just, and if you look at languages, don't really tell you how to think, but languages sort of require you to include certain information, right, when you are expressing yourself. And so there's a lot of interesting ideas going around about how that works. But at the end of the day, the main thing that you have to sort of reconcile with is that you do have a verbal mind, and within that mind is all of these sort of stories, verbal stories that you've told yourself, or right, the takes that you have applied to all the things that have happened to you, and that sort of internal narrative is part of who you are verbally, and it's how you interact with the verbal world. But that there's also, there's the real you. There is, the human animal, right? The thing that you are on sort of a deeper level, and that is not, a cursed existence to live in nature and to live with, as Adam and Eve were described as having lived, right? And say what you will about the Bible or sort of any kind of creation story, but it is sort of interesting to think about, in the case of Adam and Eve, that they are described as going around and naming things. I think that's an important detail, right? That we're sort of, I guess because they were, but no, that literally that is sort of describing the beginnings of humanity. And if you've read Chomsky as a linguist, his linguistic work, you really start to get a sense of what language actually is. And I guess Chomsky's biggest contribution to the field of linguistics is his ideas about grammar in particular that what language seems to be is not just that you identify things as opposed to just the whole, right? That you are sort of cutting the visual and sort of sensual world down into its describable. Not everything's going to be the same, but we all agree that there is sort of a gist to these words that we're using. And that sort of, if you accept this shorthand, right, that it's fake, but at the same time tends to correspond with the real world, and we can get pretty close on a lot of things. And that's the thing, is that you go down the rabbit hole of, right, well, science is supposed to tell us that this happens and doesn't happen in the universe, and it sort of assumes that the universe works the way that we think. And a big part of that is the limits of language and sort of the digital precision in which it sort of runs. And so language is very literally, sort of this thing. It seems to be this thing that's running on top of the human brains, right? Human brains that were just ripe enough to attain this level of consciousness or self-awareness, right? Because that's what it is that we're sort of going around and coding. We're using digital codes, right? A word is a sort of digital marker or code to describe what is a messy and analog natural world, right? And it may not seem like very messy or very analog because we're surrounded most of the time by human-made objects of all sorts, right? And so I guess that's one thing that you can sort of cultivate as a gardener, is a sense of what nature kind of feels like, and intuitively what you want to be feeling there, right? And that's not something that's going to be verbally told to you, right? It's not, oh, the plants are doing well or the plants are doing badly, because again, those are good and bad. That's sort of, you want to try to avoid that digital, right? What is fake, basically, anything digital is fake, but can be interpreted as, right, a representation of the analog world, the real world here. And so, if you can get down with that, I think that's it's extremely helpful thing to understand about yourself as a human. The stories that we tell ourselves, right? Just remember that these are the way that we remember things, right? There's a physical memory, but there's also a story that we've told ourselves about how that works. And as you know, the more you tell stories, the more they can kind of mutate in different directions, because we remember the gist of things. We don't remember the actual words. So that's sort of the weird thing about what it means to be human, and how human communication can actually work, because I am sitting here and you're following what I'm talking about, I hope, generally. But I could use different words to take the conversation off to a very different place. I could be talking about those marshmallow peeps that you get at Easter. I could be describing a warehouse full of them, the marshmallow peeps. The warehouse is painted purple. That's the sort of thing that language allows you to do. So in that sense, that's the infinity of digital infinity. But the digital, right, I think that's where the real power is in understanding, because you are, once you understand that is sort of how people think, and it's good and bad, right? It's gotten us to where we are, Everything man-made that you see around you is the result of language. And Chomsky describes language as something that is an emergent property of nature, just like a snowflake. That water takes the shape of a snowflake. So too, the mental space. The brains of animals can be turned digital, and then you have nature sort of cataloging itself, or something like that is what seems to be happening. Language is an inherent part of our brains. It's passed on to us genetically, most would argue at this point, and there are epigenetic as well as genetic things that are too complicated for us to understand, and that's a long way off, right? That that, as I've been talking about with landrace gardening, you accept some things are going to be infinitely more complex than any one sort of human solution is going to be able to fix. And the same is true with sort of, I think, how language resides in the brain. That's something that nobody really seems to understand in terms of what Chomsky would call the atoms of computation. He argues that language is a computational system. For what purpose this computational system exists is nobody's business to guess as users of this computational system, or sort of cogs, whatever we are, as nodes in this system of sort of observing and codifying what's going on in the universe, our perception of it anyway. So yeah, think about that next time you're doing something peaceful. We are right, and this is the sort of thing that you see reflected in all kinds of ancient philosophy. So the Adam and Eve thing, right, going around and naming things as sort of the origin of humanity. Interesting to note that before that, they were simply living in nature, and that they were told not to eat something. Right? Again, yes and no. That there is sort of a binary on anything.